You are going through the motions. You answer emails, you show up to work, you smile at the right intervals in conversation. But internally, it is completely quiet. The world feels distant, as if you are observing your own life through a pane of frosted glass. People often mistake this experience for depression, but depression carries a heavy, aching pulse. You know what hurts. The silence of emotional numbness is different. It is the literal absence of an emotional pulse, a state where neither grief nor excitement can register. This empty state rarely affects those who are naturally cold or detached. Research into compassion fatigue reveals that individuals with elevated empathic concern, the ones who absorb the stress, anxieties, and needs of everyone around them, are at the highest risk of eventually shutting down. The brain operates an emotional immune system. When exposed to small amounts of stress, that system builds resilience. But when it absorbs overwhelming doses of other people's crises for years without adequate rest, the system crashes. The capacity to feel simply runs out. Society treats this shutdown as a personal failure or a loss of character. In reality, it is a highly sophisticated biological survival protocol, triggered to protect the mind from severe psychological overstimulation. This diagram illustrates the polyvagal theory, which maps the three-tiered hierarchy of the human nervous system. At the top is the optimal state of safety and connection. Below that is the sympathetic nervous system, responsible for the fight or flight response. At the very bottom lies the oldest evolutionary defense, the freeze response. When stress becomes chronic and escape feels impossible, the nervous system pulls an emergency brake. It activates the dorsal vagal complex, intentionally decelerating body systems to conserve energy. You go offline to prevent complete cognitive collapse. To achieve this physical and psychological freeze, the brain floods the body with endogenous opioids, natural painkillers like endorphins and enkephalins. This chemical release acts as an internal anesthesia, successfully dulling the overwhelming trauma so the person can keep functioning. But that anesthesia comes with a strict biological cost. Looking at this receptor pathway, we see a single neural node blocking incoming signals. The exact same opioid receptors that dampen psychological pain are also required to process joy, connection, and pleasure. They use identical pathways. The brain cannot selectively numb the bad while preserving the good. In a desperate bid to survive an unbearable threat, the nervous system sacrifices the human capacity for love and joy. You lose access to everything at once. This survival mechanism evolved to handle singular, inescapable physical dangers. Today, it is constantly activated by the slow-burn stress of our digital environments, delivering a relentless stream of tragedies, outrages, and demands. Human emotional architecture was designed for local, resolvable challenges. It cannot handle shifting between grief, anger, and amusement dozens of times an hour. This algorithmic doom-scrolling artificially triggers the brain's threat response over and over, with no physical release or resolution. Subjected to this continuous barrage of high-arousal information, the brain's emotional alarm center, the amygdala, eventually stops reacting. It permanently quiets down to conserve energy, leaving the individual desensitized to both digital media and real-world relationships. Over time, the brain severs communication with the body altogether. Functional MRI scans of numb individuals show reduced activity in the insula, the region that reads bodily sensations. You stop feeling emotions because the brain has literally muted the physical signals of a racing heart or a tight chest. Psychologists call this alexithymia. A modern lifestyle of constant, unresolvable stimulation forces our ancient emotional hardware into a permanent state of psychological hibernation. People attempt to recover by forcing themselves to be positive, trying to leap directly from total emptiness back into happiness. The nervous system interprets this sudden emotional demand as a threat and immediately shuts down again. This vertical chart represents what psychiatrists call the window of tolerance. Inside this central zone, you can safely process feelings. Above it is the red hyperarousal zone of panic and rage. Below it is the gray hypoarousal zone, the basement of numbness and collapse. Recovery requires climbing out of the basement, But the destination is not the top. The goal is simply to reach the middle window, where you can experience a mild sensation without the system panicking and pulling the emergency brake. You cannot convince a frozen nervous system to relax using logic. You must send nonverbal, physiological cues that the environment is secure. Try rhythmic movement, a warm shower, or a weighted blanket to directly stimulate the vagus nerve, sending signals of mammalian safety. Establishing physical safety is a mandatory prerequisite for feeling. You have to biologically prove to your body that the threat has passed through somatic action before the mind will allow emotions to surface. Once the body feels secure, you introduce emotion in microscopic doses, a process called titration. We routinely praise people who appear completely unaffected by the world, mistaking their silence for strength. But remaining open when every instinct demands a shutdown requires a much deeper courage. Feeling deeply takes far more endurance than feeling nothing. Emotional numbness is an extraordinary act of biological survival. It protects the mind during life's darkest moments. But true psychological resilience is the slow, deliberate work of teaching the brain that it is finally safe to be human again.